A kiss lingered on his lips. Blood followed after. "Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I'm your host, Harrington. Tell me your city. I value your voices." Wolfe begins the chase. It was 9:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, which in the brownstone translates to silence, coffee, and the faint threat of Fritz's disapproval if I so much as hinted at breakfast before 10. Wolfe was in the plant rooms, communing with orchids and avoiding humanity. I was halfway through the Gazette, trying to decide whether to care about a crooked alderman or a crooked boxer when the doorbell rang. Now, our bell doesn't ring often. People with legitimate business make appointments, and people without it usually find the door locked. So, when it rang again, two long, one short, I got up, curious. The woman standing on the stoop had the look of someone who'd rehearsed bravery and left half of it in the cab. Late 30s, well-kept, not rich, but aware of how to suggest it. Her gloves were black, her coat too heavy for October, and her eyes, grey, sharp and too calm, were the kind that didn't blink when trouble walked in. "Mr. Wolfe," she said. "Please." That's always the hook. Please. I let her in because there are limits even to my cynicism. She stood in the office doorway like someone approaching a confessional. The orchids might have suited her better, but Wolfe would have called it blasphemy. I motioned her to the red chair and went to buzz the plant rooms. "Visitor," I said when the connection clicked. "Phooey, who?" Wolfe's voice rumbled through the speaker like a kettle refusing to boil. "Female, 30-odd, bearing distress and fashion sense. Says it's for you." He was silent for a beat. "Distress is a contagion, Archie. Spray Lysol." "She's already sitting." That got him. A long exhale, then 5 minutes. "Bring beer." I poured one and waited while he descended, moving as if gravity worked differently for him than the rest of us. Wolfe took one look at the woman, scowled as though she were a tax bill, and settled behind his desk. "My name is Mrs. Miriam Vance," she said, her hands tight in her lap. "I need your help before something happens that can't be undone." "That is an appallingly broad premise," Wolfe said. "Narrow it." She hesitated, then drew an envelope from her handbag. Cream paper, red wax seal, the whole production, and set it on his desk like an offering. "This arrived yesterday. It's addressed to my husband, but it shouldn't exist." Wolfe didn't touch it. He never does until it's time. "You have opened it." "No, I couldn't, not without help. My husband died 3 years ago." That, I admit, earned her a moment of silence. Even Wolfe looked at her instead of the envelope. "So you receive a letter for a dead man," he said, "and you imagine catastrophe." "I don't imagine it," she said. "I've already lived it once." Wolfe sipped his beer, eyeing her with that expression that could strip varnish. "You may as well tell me the nature of your previous catastrophe, madam. I dislike suspense before breakfast." She nodded. "My husband, Alan, was an architect. Brilliant, difficult, faithful to no one but his work. 3 years ago he died of a fall, an accident, they said. But now this letter arrives, sealed with his old insignia, written in his hand, and inside." She paused, trembling just enough to make it real. "Inside, I'm told, is the truth about his death." I looked at Wolfe. He was still, except for the tapping of a forefinger against the desk. For him, that was as good as pacing. "You expect me to open it?" "Yes," she said. "Because if I do, and it's what I fear, I'll go mad. And if it's what I hope, it will ruin someone powerful." Wolfe closed his eyes. "Madame, you come to me not for investigation, but absolution. You wish me to act as confessor." She met his gaze evenly. "I'm willing to pay for either." That cracked one corner of his mouth, his version of a smile. "Archie," he said, "place the envelope in the safe. We shall open it when the orchids have digested my irritation." She rose, relief and dread fighting for her posture. You'll help me then? I have accepted your envelope, Wolfe said, which is, regrettably, more than I have accepted from most of civilization. Return tomorrow at 11. Mr. Goodwin will contact you if the contents demand haste. When she was gone, the office seemed to breathe again. I put the envelope in the safe, double-locked. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, fingers steepled. Archie, he murmured, we are about to play host to a ghost, and ghosts, my boy, are never punctual. They arrive precisely when they can do the most harm. The envelope slept in the safe like a coiled snake, and Wolfe pretended not to hear it hissing. He went upstairs to the orchids for the 11 to 1, which in our house is as inviolable as the Constitution before Congress gets it. I parked at my desk with the Gazette, read 3 columns that failed to improve, and was deciding whether to insult the crossword when the bell went off again. This time, the ring was short, irritated, and frequent. Someone who believed persistence is a credential. I opened up on the chain. The man on the step had the practiced, expensive fatigue that New York lawyers cultivate like rooftop time. Mid-40s, polished hat, a mouth that took depositions even when it wasn't speaking. He held out a card. Ralph K. Linden. Vance and Linden, counselors at law. Mrs. Miriam Vance is a client, he said, as if I'd asked him to justify oxygen. She told me she was consulting Mr. Wolfe. I'll see him. You will, I said, but not before 1 o'clock unless you can pollinate orchids. You can tell me the flavor. His eyes did a quick inventory of me, the foyer, the fact that the door behind me was chained. There has been a misunderstanding. Mrs. Vance is distraught. If she left anything with Mr. Wolfe, we will collect it and spare her the embarrassment of a public imbroglio. I love a good imbroglio, I said. We're fresh out. Try back at 1. He didn't like that. Mr. Goodwin, I know the reputation of this establishment. It relies on boundaries. Allow me to reinforce them. The item Mrs. Vance left is property that touches on privileged communications and estate matters. If it is opened without proper authority. I swung the chain loose and stepped into the gap so he'd have to talk to me and not to the void behind me. If you finish that sentence, counselor, I'll have to get a dictionary, and Mr. Wolfe hates it when I use more than one before lunch. The item is secure. Come back at 1. He measured the odds, found them unflattering, and gave me a thin smile. Then I'll return with the authority. He turned and went down the steps like a man who wanted the walk to hear it was being held in contempt. That was the first disturbance. The second arrived 10 minutes later in the form of the mail, which is ordinarily as exciting as steamed cauliflower. Fritz brought it on a tray, because Fritz brings everything on a tray if he can help it. Among the circulars and a bill for the phone we don't use enough, there was another envelope, thick and sealed with red wax. This one was addressed to me. Now that, I told Fritz, is interesting. He nodded like a priest to mystery. I will fetch a knife. I slit it at my desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed with the kind of steady, anonymous font that would make a ransom note feel at home. It said, "Do not open her letter. It will kill more than it saves." A friend of Alan's. Fritz leaned in, and I let him read it because Fritz knows more about people than most people do. "Bah," he said gently. "When a cook tells you not to lift the lid, it's because he burned the onions." I buzzed the plant rooms. "Messenger," I said when Wolfe clicked in, "delivered a billet doux for me. It advises against our curiosity, signed in a way that would give handwriting experts a nervous fit." "Bring it here," he said. "No, leave it. I will come." He came sooner than the orchids like, which told me the safe's hiss had reached him anyway. He read the note once, scowled, and read it again as if the second reading might contain repentance. "Archie, describe Mr. Linden." I did. Wolfe put the paper down and prodded it with his gaze. "We are being nudged from 2 directions, law and sentiment. It is too early for both. Have the house closed. No one admitted until 1. Fritz will instruct Theodore to keep any callers from the back. Then telephone Mrs. Vance. Tell her that imbecility has begun to orbit us, and she will attend earlier than planned, at 12. I dialed. Mrs. Vance answered on, the third ring with a voice that hadn't slept but wouldn't confess it. I relayed Wolfe's edit to the schedule and the new contributions to our correspondence. She agreed to 12 with a gratitude that struck me as precise, not effusive. She had practice containing things. At 11:50, the bell tried again. I didn't need to look to know it wasn't Mrs. Vance. When a woman rehearses bravery, she arrives at the time she promised, not 10 minutes prior. I cracked the door on the chain. The caller was 26 if you believed his coat and 20 if you believed his eyes. Thin, good shoes, hair that had been combed into compliance and would soon revolt. He carried a portfolio tube and the particular dread of a man who has been sent. "Mr. Goodwin," he asked, "you get points for accuracy. State your business." "I'm Noah Pike. I worked under Alan Vance at the firm." He lifted the tube like an offering you give to a picky deity. "Mrs. Vance called me. She said if I had sketches or notes that might help Mr. Wolfe, Alan's older stuff, I should bring them. Can I come in?" He used the name as if touching it burned him. I have a soft spot for the honest kind of pain, but there were rules. "You can come in at 12 with her. 2 minutes. Stand by that radiator and reconsider your life choices." When Miriam Vance did arrive on the dot, she came with another presence trailing her like a weather front. Tall, handsome in a magazine way, a scarf arranged without apology. He didn't need a card. He came with his own caption. Celia Ardmore's face has that effect if you read architecture sections. Widow of the patron saint of modernist hotels, inheritor of taste and money, occasional benefactor to design competitions. Except that the scarfed person wasn't Celia. He was Gideon Ardmore, the son, who curated the brand and the gossip. "I insisted," he told me, brushing past hesitation. "Mrs. Vance shouldn't navigate this alone, and Alan designed my father's last property before that tragedy. If there's been some grotesque revival—" "Into the office," I said, because the air was getting crowded with adjectives. I brought them in together, Miriam composed and pale, Noah with his tube like a weapon he didn't trust, and Gideon quick-eyed and impatient with other people's custody of his time. Wolfe did not rise. He does not rise for kings, and he wouldn't for princes of concrete. He greeted Miriam with the incline of a head that meant she had, by virtue of the safe's contents, become gravity. He let the others assemble themselves and then looked at me. "Lock the front," he said, "and bring chairs." Noah's hands shook when he unscrewed the tube. Rolls of paper slid out like secret tongues. He stopped them with a quick, embarrassed grab. Gideon gave him a look that wanted to be sympathetic but had to be fashionable first. Miriam sat with her gloves clenched on her knee and her gaze fixed not on Wolfe but on the safe. Before anyone could make a sound that counted, the back bell rang. 3 light taps that belonged to deliveries. Fritz appeared in the doorway with a tray decently balanced and an indecent frown. "Another envelope," he said, and I didn't like how he said it. He handed it to me. Same cream paper, same red wax, same deliberate weight. The address this time was to Nero Wolfe. Wolfe studied it, his mouth flattening. He set it on the blotter and did not touch it. "This house," he said almost conversationally, "is not a post office. Mr. Goodwin, we will now find out who believes otherwise. Miriam, if you please, your husband's insignia. When was it last used?" 4 years ago, she said. Before the fall, he stopped sealing anything after clients began to prefer email to ink. Only 1 box of that wax was left. I kept it in a drawer I don't open. "Yet the world abrades drawers," Wolfe murmured. He looked at me. "Archie, the door. We accept no more apparitions." And then bring me the safe key. We will not be dictated to by paper. I did as told. When I turned back, everyone was watching the new envelope as if it had started to breathe. Wolfe reached for the bell cord and tugged once, the signal for attention. His voice, when he spoke, was as mild as milk. "Before we open anything," he said, "we will establish who desires what to remain closed. That, I think, will save time, and perhaps a life." For a moment, no one moved. Wolfe's words seemed to hang in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Mrs. Vance's gloved hands tightened in her lap until the leather creaked. Noah Pike's fingers gripped the edge of his portfolio tube, and Gideon Ardmore's practiced composure slipped enough for a flicker of impatience to cross his face. I was standing behind Wolfe's chair, which is the only position in that room where you can see everyone and still keep one hand near the phone, just in case civilization breaks down. Wolfe leaned forward slightly, an event on par with an eclipse, and reached for his pen. He didn't open either envelope. He merely drew one finger across the flap of the newest and then sat back again, as though that had been enough to tell him something the rest of us couldn't see. "This is a pattern," he said softly. "Two missives, both sealed with the same mark, both addressed to those directly involved in Alan Vance's past. The sender, whoever they are, is no fool. They know that an enigma addressed to the dead is irresistible." Mrs. Vance's voice was low, almost too steady. "You still haven't opened the first letter, Mr. Wolfe." "Why?" "Because, madam," he replied, "a trap is most illuminating before it's sprung. The moment I open that envelope, its value as bait diminishes. I wish first to observe the creatures it lures." That didn't satisfy Gideon Ardmore, who was already halfway out of his chair. "You mean to tell us we're here for a performance? My father's company was almost ruined once by gossip about Alan Vance's death. I won't let it happen again because you enjoy suspense." I said, "Sit down, Mr. Ardmore. Nobody's selling tickets. Yet." Wolfe ignored us both. He turned his eyes on Noah Pike. "You, sir, you are Mr. Vance's assistant. Did you handle his correspondence?" "Yes, sometimes. Toward the end he wrote very little by hand. He'd dictate notes, sketches, project details. But that wax seal, it's genuine. He used it on his personal plans. He said the design, a compass inside a broken circle, reminded him that perfection can't be trusted." "That is not only pretentious," Wolfe murmured. "It is dangerous philosophy. And you, Mr. Ardmore, you say your father's final commission involved Mr. Vance?" "Yes. A resort in Maine. Vance was the chief architect until he fell. Afterward, the project nearly collapsed, and my father finished it through other channels. But there were rumors. Financial irregularities, missing blueprints, clients who thought they'd been double-billed. My father kept quiet to avoid scandal." Mrs. Vance turned to him sharply. "You never said that to me." He spread his hands. "It wasn't my place." "That's one way of saying it," I put in. "Another is that it wasn't convenient." Wolfe flicked me a glance that meant enough and reached for his beer. He took a deliberate sip, then set it down. "Let us assume," he said, "that these letters are a means of resurrection. Someone wishes to revive Alan Vance's ghost, not for affection, but for leverage. The method is elegant because it relies on memory, which cannot be disproved. Mrs. Vance, was your husband ever blackmailed?" "Never," she said quickly. Then, less firmly, "Not that I knew." "Yet you feared this letter," Wolfe said. "Not because it might contain affection, but because it might contain accusation." She didn't answer. The silence stretched until Fritz appeared with another tray. Coffee this time, and the civilized smell of it seemed to loosen something in the room. Wolfe nodded his thanks, but didn't drink. His mind was already 10 miles ahead of ours. "Archie," he said, "you will accompany Mrs. Vance home. Observe who watches her building. Search the postbox. If there are more letters, take them. Then visit Mr. Linden, the lawyer, and inform him that I will speak to him this evening at 8. Saul Panzer may be useful. Engage him. We must determine how these letters travel and from whose hand." "Got it," I said. "And if I find someone licking red wax in the hallway?" "Tell him," Wolfe said, "that resurrection is hazardous to one's health." That was the signal the meeting was over. Wolfe dismissed them with a polite nod that made it clear they had served their purpose. For now. Mrs. Vance gathered her coat with care. Noah Pike rolled up his drawings like someone sealing away a confession. Gideon Ardmore left last, pausing by the door. "If this becomes public," he said to Wolfe, "you'll find yourself part of the story." "Sir," Wolfe replied without opening his eyes, "I am always part of the story. I merely choose which chapter." When they were gone, the office returned to its usual calm, except for the 2 envelopes on the desk. Wolfe regarded them as if they were twin diseases in incubation. "Archie," he said after a long pause, "note how quickly word travels when one wishes it not to. 2 letters, 3 visitors, and already the brownstone hums like a hive. That will not do." "Then I'll start with Mrs. Vance," I said, taking my hat. "You'll get your quiet as soon as I get my answers." He grunted. "You will get facts, not answers." "Answers belong to me." By the time I reached the sidewalk, the October air had turned damp and mean, the kind that makes the city smell like metal and memory. Mrs. Vance's address was on East 67th in one of those old brick buildings that pretended to have doormen until you looked closer and saw the rent signs. She rode in the cab beside me, staring out the window. "Whoever's doing this," she said quietly, "they want to hurt more than me. Alan's work, his name, it was never clean. But he didn't deserve what happened." "Which part?" I asked. She turned then, and her gray eyes had that steady calm again. "The fall. It wasn't an accident." That landed between us like another envelope. I didn't say anything until we stopped at her building. I followed her in, checked the mailboxes, no new deliveries, and glanced up the stairwell. Empty. Too empty. She unlocked her apartment door and hesitated before pushing it open. The smell hit first. Faint, metallic, wrong. Not blood, not gas, just intrusion. Inside, the lights were on. The living room was neat except for one detail. The desk drawer hung open, and a ribbon of red wax had been spilled across the floor like a dropped signature. She gasped, hand to her mouth. "That drawer, where I kept the box." I stepped past her and knelt by it. The box was gone. In its place lay a single sheet of paper, folded once, sealed with no wax at all. I opened it carefully. The message was typed, same anonymous font as before. "You opened the wrong door. Next time you won't." I looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the brownstone, the composure cracked. I told her quietly, "Mrs. Vance, I think your husband just sent us his first reply." I stood there long enough for the smell to deepen, an odor like old pennies and damp plaster, the scent of a place recently disturbed. The apartment had that practiced neatness that means someone's been holding it together by willpower alone. A vase on the mantel was tilted just enough to prove a hand had brushed it. Mrs. Vance stayed by the doorway, her gloves raised as if they could keep the air away. "Stay put," I told her, stepping farther in. "If whoever came back left fingerprints, I'd rather not add mine to the collection." She didn't move or answer. Her eyes were on the open drawer, the faint trail of red wax leading to it. I checked the windows first, both locked from the inside. The fire escape had dust on it, unbroken. Entry wasn't through there. The front door's lock had no marks, but the bolt didn't catch properly when I turned it. It could have been picked by anyone with steady fingers and time. I took out my notebook. "You said you kept that box of wax here. How long ago did you last see it?" "Months," she said. "I hardly think about it. Alan used it for personal drawings. I packed it away after he died. And no one else knew it was here. No one. Well, somebody's added themselves to the guest list. I crouched beside the desk and studied the note again. The typeface was the same as the one I'd received. Monospace, firm, deliberate. Whoever wrote it didn't use a cheap machine. Did your husband own a typewriter? She shook her head. He hated them. Said they were soulless. He dictated everything to his secretary, or to me. Then we're dealing with a ghost who knows how to type. That earned the faintest flicker of a smile, gone before it finished forming. Do you think this is... She started, then stopped. I think, I said, that someone wants you afraid enough to make mistakes. And they're getting there. Her voice thinned. Mr. Goodwin, if this goes further, if more people find out about Alan's death, it will destroy what's left of me. I looked around the room again. The furnishings were quality but tired. She'd held on to comfort, but not abundance. Fear does strange things to money. If you hired us for secrecy, I said, you picked the right man. Wolfe doesn't chase headlines. He chases truth and occasionally me, when I forget to pick up the beer order. That got another small, uncertain curve at the corner of her mouth. Then please, find out who sent this, and why now. I intend to, but I'll need to take this note. I folded it carefully and slid it into an envelope from her desk. Wolfe will want to look. In the meantime, you might consider staying elsewhere tonight. Someone knew how to get in once. They might try again. She nodded slowly. I have a sister in Connecticut. I'll go there, but please call me if anything breaks, I finished. You'll be first on the list. I saw her into a cab and watched it vanish east before calling Saul Panzer from a phone booth. Saul doesn't ask for background. He asks for directions and gets there first. I gave him Mrs. Vance's address, told him to keep watch till midnight, and hung up. Then I turned west toward the brownstone, where I knew Wolfe was probably marinating in thought and beer. When I got back, the house smelled of garlic and oregano, Fritz's doing, and order had been restored. Wolfe was in his chair, the two envelopes still unbroken on the desk like twin commandments. He didn't look up when I came in. Well, he said, her place was entered. The box of red wax is gone. The intruder left a note typed on the same machine as mine. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no extra ghosts. Saul's watching the place. Wolfe grunted, which in his vocabulary can mean anything from good to damnation. And Mrs. Vance? Shaken but stable. She's gone to Connecticut. I'd say that's a sensible move. Indeed. Fear can be therapeutic when it leads to distance. I set the new note on his blotter beside the others. This makes 3, unless you're counting threats to my sanity. He picked it up delicately, scanning the single sentence with the care of a jeweler. So, our correspondent warns, invades, and corrects. You opened the wrong door. Interesting phrasing. He regards you as participant, not spectator, and yet he restrains himself from actual violence. Why? Maybe he's saving it for the right door, I said. Wolfe ignored the humor. No, Archie. This person wishes to shape perception. The letters are not messages. They are staging. Someone is curating fear. He leaned back, the leather sighing under his weight. What of the lawyer? Lyndon? Scheduled for 8. He'll come. Men like that always do when you threaten their sense of control. Good. I will dine at 7. You will attend to him in the front room until I am ready. And Archie, send Fred Durkin to check on Mr. Pike. I wish to know whether our young architect's conscience has improved since lunch. It was 6 by the time I reached the garage to call Fred. He took the assignment with his usual grunt and promised to report in 2 hours. By then, twilight had bruised the sky, and the brownstone's lamps threw long yellow stripes across the rug. I poured myself a beer and waited while Fritz laid out Wolfe's dinner. At 7:45, the bell rang. Ralph Linden arrived looking as if he'd argued with his own reflection and lost. His tie was looser, his eyes restless. I took him into the front room and let him pace until Wolfe summoned us at precisely 8. Wolfe gestured him toward the red chair. "You were correct to return, Mr. Linden. It saves me the nuisance of subpoenaing your conscience." "I don't respond to threats," Linden said tightly. "Only reason I'm here is because my client's safety may be at risk." "Your client," Wolfe murmured, "has already been relieved of one item of property and nearly of her composure. You will therefore cooperate." Linden hesitated. Then, with the air of a man dropping a safe on his own foot, he pulled a folded document from his briefcase and set it down. "Alan Vance's death wasn't as closed as you think. There was an inquiry, quiet, private. I handled it, and there was a second will." That got Wolfe's full attention. His brows rose a fraction, which is his version of a gasp. "A second will," he repeated. "How discreet of you to omit it this morning." "I was bound by confidentiality." "You are now bound," Wolfe said smoothly, "by interest. Continue." Linden's jaw tightened. "The second will left everything, money, royalties, drawings, to someone named Gideon Ardmore. Mrs. Vance never knew. It was unsigned, but the handwriting matched Alan's drafts. The original vanished before probate. And now," Wolfe said, "it resurfaces through letters that appear in triplicate. Mr. Linden, you are about to learn what true discretion costs. Archie, bring the safe." When I swung it open and laid the first envelope beside the others, Wolfe smiled. Not from pleasure, but from certainty. "Gentlemen," he said, "we are no longer dealing with a mystery of death. We are dealing with one of inheritance, and those," he added, "are always written in ink far darker than blood." Linden's words hung in the air long after he stopped talking. Wolfe didn't move, didn't even blink. He sat there, one hand resting lightly on the arm of his chair, the other on the edge of the desk near the envelopes. You could have dropped a marching band in the office, and he wouldn't have looked away from that lawyer. Finally, he spoke. "Unsigned, missing, and now resurrected. Tell me, Mr. Linden, how does one misplace a man's final testament?" Linden's jaw flexed. Alan Vance's estate was complicated. He had projects, royalties, holdings in several trusts. There were disputes even before his death. The second will, if you can call it that, was never formalized. It might have been a draft or bait. I don't know. You knew enough to hide it. "I preserved it," Linden snapped, then caught himself. Mrs. Vance was in shock. The investors were circling. I chose silence. "Pooh," Wolfe said mildly. "Silence is rarely a virtue in men of your profession. You preserved it for someone else's advantage." "Whose?" Linden exhaled through his nose, the air of a man who knows every answer is the wrong one. "There was talk," he said finally. "Alan suspected someone inside Ardmore's firm was using his designs. Projects never submitted, ideas lifted from his private notebooks. He told me he intended to expose it. Then, 2 weeks later, he was dead." "An accident," I said. "Officially." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "And unofficially?" "Unprovable," Linden said. "The scaffolding gave way, but Alan was careful. Too careful." Wolfe leaned back, his eyelids lowering. "Then our ghost's letters are not merely theatrical. They are restitution. Someone wishes the truth of that fall to rise again. But to what end?" No one answered. The office had gone still except for the slow tick of the wall clock. I broke the silence. We could ask the one person who stood to benefit from that unsigned will. "Gideon Ardmore." Wolfe nodded faintly. "Indeed, though I suspect Mr. Ardmore would claim the very idea is defamatory. Archie, call him. Tell him I require his attendance tomorrow at 11. His choice is punctuality or subpoena." Linden stirred uneasily. "You can't compel him. He's—" Wolfe lifted a hand. I can compel anyone who prefers secrecy to truth. Good evening, Mr. Linden. You have performed adequately for a man in an impossible position. Archie will see you out. The lawyer rose, stiff and pale, and I ushered him to the door. When I returned, Wolfe had the first envelope in his hand, the wax seal glinting under the lamp. Now? I asked. Now, he said, and slid a letter opener through the seal with surgical precision. Inside was a single folded page, the paper yellowed slightly, but the ink crisp. Wolfe unfolded it and read in silence, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he handed it to me without a word. The letter was brief. Too brief. To Miriam. If this finds you, I have failed to finish what must be done. There are designs. Stolen, hidden, profited upon by men who think a compass points only to money. Trust no one from Ardmore's circle. And if I die, tell Linden to burn the drafts. They are the kiss before blood. No signature, but the handwriting, if real, was clean, deliberate, masculine. Well, I said, that's friendly. A dead man accusing his employer, a vanished will giving the same man everything, and a lawyer who spent 3 years sitting on the evidence. Add a couple more ghosts and we'll have a séance. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. The phrase, the kiss before blood. That is not casual. It denotes foreknowledge, a final act disguised as affection. You perceive, of course, that he knew his end was not accidental. He also knew how to write for effect, I said. The man had style. Style is not evidence. Motive is. Someone feared Alan Vance's exposure enough to remove him, and now someone else resurrects him. The correspondence is not revenge. It is choreography. I frowned. Meaning what? Someone's arranging all this to make Ardmore fall? Perhaps. Or perhaps to make Mrs. Vance believe so. You see, Archie, orchestration is more efficient than guilt. One merely sets the tempo. He reached for the second unopened letter, the one addressed to himself. Shall we see what part we play in the symphony? He broke the seal, unfolded it, and read aloud. You will not find justice, Mr. Wolfe. You will find reflection. The man who fell built his own ruin. The woman who mourns him helped him. The one who profits from him never needed to lift a hand. But open your door, and you will see them all again, each seeking absolution where none exists. Wolfe's brow furrowed. Anonymous composition, but intelligent, possibly even intimate. He tapped the paper. Note the structure. It speaks of reflection, mirrors. Whoever wrote this knows my methods. Great, I said. That narrows it down to anyone who's read a newspaper in the last 20 years. He ignored that. Archie, tomorrow will be delicate. I wish all three, Mrs. Vance, Mr. Ardmore, and Mr. Pike, present at 11. Linden, too. Saul will attend unseen. The truth, I think, will make its entrance uninvited. That was Wolfe's version of a prophecy, and I'd learned not to doubt them. I went upstairs to my room and tried to write up the day's report, but my brain kept circling that phrase. The kiss before blood. It had rhythm, menace, and something almost personal about it. At midnight, the phone rang. I caught it before the second ring, expecting Saul. Archie? His voice was low, tight. I'm outside Mrs. Vance's building. Thought you should know. The lock was fixed. New one. But half an hour ago, someone came by. Tall, male, carrying a tube like an architect's case. He didn't go in, just stood across the street, watching the windows. Then he left. Face. Couldn't see. But he moved like he knew the place. Thought you'd want it. I do, I said. Stay another hour, then go home. When I hung up, I stood by the window, looking out at the dark, quiet street. Somewhere out there, somebody was trying to rewrite history with letters and wax and fear, and Wolfe, God help them, had already started to read between the lines. I turned off the light, but sleep stayed out of reach. Because when a dead man starts sending messages, It's never the dead one you should be worried about. It's whoever's writing on his behalf. And by the next morning, the brownstone had that kind of brittle quiet that means Wolfe is thinking and doesn't want the world to interrupt. Fritz moved like a man under a vow of silence, and I didn't risk clattering my coffee spoon. When I carried the first tray upstairs, Wolfe was already seated at his desk, fully dressed, which meant the case had taken up permanent residence in his brain. The 2 opened letters were spread in front of him, their contents copied neatly onto index cards, his way of caging ideas before they multiply. "Archie," he said without looking up, "there is an elegance to deception when it pretends to be confession. Whoever writes as Alan Vance has no need of forgery. They rely on theatre." I sat. "You think it's staged to draw us in?" "Of course it is. Yet the author knows too much for mere play. They understand my distaste for emotional manipulation, and they exploit it. That makes them acquainted either with me or with someone who is. Or with human nature in general," I said. "There's no shortage of people who'd like to see you chew on a paradox." He gave me the kind of glare that counts as affection in our household. "You will fetch Mr. Ardmore first. It is nearly 10. Mr. Pike and Mr. Linden will follow. Mrs. Vance arrives last. I require the full cast present before the curtain rises." "Understood. Anything else?" "Yes. Inform Saul Panzer to remain outside and observe arrivals. I wish to know who speaks to whom when they believe they are unseen." I called Saul, then left for Gideon Ardmore's apartment on West 57th. He lived in one of those modern glass stacks that scream, "money but whisper taste." The doorman looked at me like I was a misplaced delivery, but a quick mention of Wolfe's name opened the gates of heaven. Ardmore met me in the lobby, dressed for a press photo, tailored charcoal suit, pocket square like a signature flourish. "I was expecting your call," he said, "and I was half hoping you'd lose my number." "I rarely lose anything that can cause trouble," I told him. "Wolfe wants you at 11 sharp." He adjusted his cufflinks. "I'm not accustomed to being summoned." "Then consider this a novelty. We're all about cultural experiences." His smile didn't touch his eyes. "Tell Wolfe I'll come, but not as a suspect. I'm there to clarify history, not to be cross-examined by it." "Fine," I said. "Just remember, Wolfe doesn't believe in history, only causation." He arrived on time. Barely. Saul had reported that Ardmore came alone, but paused a block away to make a phone call. Saul hadn't been close enough to hear, but the recipient's tone, from what he caught, wasn't friendly. Inside, Wolfe had arranged the room like a tribunal, the red chair for Mrs. Vance, another for Ardmore, and the rest set in a semicircle that made the office feel suddenly smaller. When everyone had assembled, Linden stiff as starch, Pike pale as chalk, and Mrs. Vance quiet but coiled, Wolfe rang for beer and began. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I dislike melodrama, yet circumstances insist. You are here because 3 letters, each delivered under different pretexts, have resurrected a dead man. The implication is that Alan Vance's death was no accident. The purpose, however, remains to be established." Linden started to speak, but Wolfe lifted a hand. "In due course, Mr. Linden. First, we examine the instruments of deception." Mr. Goodwin read aloud the final letter, the one addressed to me. I did, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. When I finished, Wolfe leaned back. It is, you'll agree, both accusation and eulogy. Each of you is implicated by inference. Mrs. Vance, the woman who mourns him helped him. Mr. Ardmore, the one who profits from him never needed to lift a hand. Mr. Linden, the man who built his ruin. These phrases are not arbitrary, they are architecture. Gideon Ardmore crossed his legs. Architecture written by a lunatic or someone with too much free time. Possibly both, Wolfe said evenly, but not aimless. The author is methodical. They understand your histories with Mr. Vance and expect me to interpret them. Therefore I shall. He closed his eyes, which meant he was about to launch one of his verbal autopsies. Alan Vance's work was coveted, his ideas adaptable, lucrative. Mr. Ardmore, your father's firm, profited from his designs after his death, yet no lawsuits followed. Why? Ardmore's mouth tightened. Because nothing was stolen. The firm owned the projects he worked on. His estate had no claim. And yet, Wolfe said, a second will existed, naming you sole beneficiary. That would have provided ownership beyond legality, ownership of legacy. Convenient, yes? Ardmore looked genuinely startled. That's absurd. I never knew about any will. Lyndon shifted in his seat. It wasn't signed. It never left my office. Wolfe's eyelids lifted. Until now, you mean? But the timing is exquisite. The letters begin 3 years after the death, precisely when the firm's expansion under Mr. Ardmore faces scrutiny for design irregularities. Someone seeks to remind the world of a debt unpaid. Mrs. Vance finally spoke, her voice low. But who? What could they gain? Power, Wolfe said simply. Or vindication. Perhaps both. Noah Pike, who'd been silent until then, cleared his throat. If someone wanted proof, stolen plans, for example, they might look for Alan's old sketches. I had copies once, years ago, but they vanished from my files after he died. I thought... He stopped, eyes darting toward Ardmore. You thought what? I asked. That someone from the firm took them. They were valuable. Ardmore leaned forward, his tone cutting. Careful, Pike. I could ruin you with a single phone call. Pike swallowed hard. You already did once. That landed like a hammer in velvet. Wolfe watched them as if he were timing their heartbeats. Ah, so the animus is mutual. Excellent. It clarifies motive, if not guilt. Before Ardmore could respond, the bell rang, 3 quick taps from the front. I started to rise, but Fritz's voice called from the hall. Mr. Goodwin, a messenger, urgent envelope. I went to the door, and there it was again, cream paper, red wax, at deliberate weight. The handwriting was the same, addressed not to any of us, but to the heirs of Alan Vance. I carried it in and set it before Wolfe. He didn't touch it immediately. His gaze swept the room, measuring each face, each flicker of fear or defiance. Then he said very quietly, It seems, ladies and gentlemen, our ghost has excellent timing. Mr. Goodwin, lock the door. I did. The click echoed through the room like a verdict. Wolfe stared at the envelope as though it had spoken. Now, he said, we shall learn whether the dead write in ink or in strategy. No one spoke while Wolfe regarded that envelope. He didn't touch it at first. He only studied the seal as if he could read through wax and paper. The air had that taut, metallic quiet that comes before something decisive. Gideon Ardmore shifted in his chair, restless, and Mrs. Vance's gloved hands folded tighter until the knuckles shone. Finally, Wolfe said, Archie, kindly observe the witnesses. That was my cue. I looked around the room like a theater critic judging a bad play. Ardmore, impatient but too proud to show fear. Mrs. Vance, her composure strained thin as glass. Lyndon, rigid as law itself, and Noah Pike, young enough to look guilty even if he wasn't. Duly observed, I said. Everyone's ready for the curtain. Wolfe nodded. He used a knife to slit the wax, slow and neat, and drew out a single folded sheet. No type this time. Handwriting, bold, deliberate, almost architectural in its lines. He read in silence, then passed it to me. The note said, To the heirs of Alan Vance. You have spent 3 years burying a truth that refuses to stay dead. His designs, his name, his love, all sold or stolen. One of you killed him, whether by hand or betrayal. Before this week ends, so will your silence. The last drawing remains where it was first sketched. Beneath the place he fell, there was no signature. I looked up. Whoever's writing this knows how to keep things lively. Mrs. Vance's lips parted, but no sound came out. Beneath the place he fell, that's the construction site, the resort. Still standing? I asked. Finished 2 years ago, said Ardmore. A hotel now, the Vance Pavilion. My father insisted the name stay for reputation's sake. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. Irony and masonry. Fitting. Lyndon cleared his throat. Mr. Wolfe, this borders on criminal harassment. These letters, whatever their origin, are destabilizing lives and reputations. You must advise Mrs. Vance to turn them over to the authorities. Bah, Wolfe said. The authorities, Mr. Lyndon, are to crime what pastry chefs are to fire control. They will trample whatever delicate threads remain. No. The sender wishes discovery, but only on their terms. That suggests they expect an audience. Ardmore stood abruptly. Enough riddles. Whoever this is, they're using Alan's name to blackmail us. That's extortion. Not yet, Wolfe said. Merely theater. Extortion requires payment. What we have is performance and performers. Sit down. There was something in his tone that could have made an army sit. Ardmore obeyed, jaw tight. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, you will take the midnight train to Maine, the resort. Bring Saul Panzer with you. Find the precise site of the accident. Beneath it, there may indeed be something left. I'm curious whether our phantom deals in relics or invention. I started to protest, but he was already reaching for the bell cord. Fritz will prepare sandwiches. You'll leave in an hour. Mrs. Vance spoke suddenly, almost desperate. You believe the letter. You think Alan left something. I believe, Wolfe said, that someone wants us to look there, which makes it necessary that we do before they can. By the time Saul and I were on the train, the city had shrunk behind us into a ribbon of light. Saul, being Saul, didn't ask questions until we were halfway to Portland. So, he said, adjusting his hat, we're digging under a dead man's legend. Exactly, I said, and Wolfe's betting the body isn't the only thing that fell. We reached the resort just after dawn. The Vance Pavilion stood on a rocky bluff overlooking the Atlantic, a sleek structure of glass and steel as modern as guilt allows. The manager, a stiff man named Harland, met us with suspicion and the manners of a man guarding more than guests. We don't allow press, he said immediately. Good, I told him. We're not press. We're private eyes. Which is worse? He blinked. I beg your pardon. We're investigating the late Mr. Vance's accident, off the record. Mr. Wolfe requests access to the original construction plans and the accident site. That was 3 years ago, Harland said. Everything's been rebuilt. Then it'll be easy to find what's missing. He hesitated, then led us through a staff corridor and down to the maintenance level. The concrete was new, too clean, but when we reached the outer platform, a balcony overlooking the sea, I could picture the original scaffolding. That's where he fell, Harland said, pointing toward the cliff's edge. They said he slipped. Saul crouched near the railing. Reinforced recently, he murmured. See the welds? Not 3 years old. Maybe 1. Repairs? I asked. Harland looked uncomfortable. We had some corrosion issues last spring. Salt air. Routine maintenance. Uh-huh. I followed the line of the beam down to where it met the foundation. There was a hollow patch in the concrete, roughly filled like a scar. That patch wasn't routine. Saul knelt, tapping it with his knuckles. Thin layer. Something's underneath. Harland stepped back. Gentlemen, this is private property. So's truth, I said. But it has a way of breaking and entering. We found a crowbar in a nearby tool closet, and within 5 minutes Saul had lifted the top layer clean. Inside the cavity, wrapped in oilskin, was a flat, rectangular bundle. He pulled it free, brushed off the grit, and unrolled it on the floor. Blueprints, 3 of them. Signed Alan Vance. Each stamped with the Ardmore firm's insignia. but one had a bold red X slashed across it in wax pencil, and beneath it, written in the same hand that had penned the letter, was a line: "They will build on my death, so let them drown in it." Harland muttered something religious. I stared at the words. "That's not a message," I said quietly. "That's a map." Saul nodded. "To what?" "To whoever decided 3 years later it was worth killing for a gain." He looked at me. "We taking this back to Wolfe?" "Yeah," I said. "But if you ask me, we just opened more than concrete. We just dug up the reason someone's still writing letters from the grave." As the train carried us back south through the grey morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that Alan Vance hadn't fallen by accident or entirely by force. Wolfe was right about one thing. Whoever was behind those envelopes wasn't finished yet. They were just building to the final act. We reached the brownstone just before noon, still smelling of salt air and unanswered questions. Wolfe was in his chair, as immovable as furniture, the unreadable calm of a man who'd already guessed the shape of the news. The minute Saul set the oilskin bundle on the desk, Wolfe's eyes flicked to it and then to me. "Well," he said, "was the grave as fertile as promised?" "You could say that," I told him. "Vance left us blueprints all right. Signed, sealed, and buried under a few tons of concrete, and someone went to trouble making sure they stayed there." Saul unfolded the drawings on Wolfe's desk, weighing the corners with beer bottles before they could curl. The one marked with the red X lay on top, the pencil slash glaring like an accusation. Wolfe leaned forward, his nostrils widening faintly, which was as close as he ever came to enthusiasm. "Interesting," he murmured. "So deliberate, so final. The message below the mark?" I recited it. "They will build on my death, so let them drown in it." He closed his eyes. Architectural vengeance. To drown one's betrayers in one's own creation. Remarkable symmetry. Very nearly feasible. "Feasible?" I asked. "You think he meant it literally?" "Mr. Vance was not poetic by accident," Wolfe said. "If the structure incorporated a flaw by design, one whose exposure would imperil its owners, then his death secured their silence. Until now." Saul frowned. "You think he built the place to collapse?" "No," Wolfe said softly. "To remind them it could." That chilled the room more than the sea breeze had. Wolfe reached for his bell cord and tugged once. Fritz appeared silently. "Beer," Wolfe said, "and lunch for 3. Mr. Panzer has earned indulgence." Saul excused himself not long after, leaving Wolfe and me with the blueprints. I watched him trace the lines with one heavy finger, murmuring under his breath about proportion and intent, like he was talking to Vance himself. Finally, he said, "Archie, call Mrs. Vance. Tell her to come at 6. Mr. Ardmore and the others as well. Tonight, we conclude." That was the kind of confidence that didn't need rehearsal. They began to arrive as dusk settled. The same cast, but different faces. Now. Fear and fatigue had done their quiet remodeling. Mrs. Vance looked brittle but resolute, her gloves gone, her hands steady on her purse. Gideon Ardmore came second, still immaculate but with a twitch behind his confidence, as if the foundation under him was starting to tilt. Linden and Pike followed, neither happy to be here but both afraid not to be. Wolfe let them arrange themselves in front of the desk. The blueprints, still weighted, lay between them like a corpse on display. "I've had a busy afternoon," he began, his tone as mild as milk. "These drawings are authentic. One, however, was altered after Mr. Vance's death, the one with the red X. The alterations conceal an original structural warning, a miscalculated beam positioned to fail under stress." Ardmore leaned forward. "That's impossible. My engineers checked everything. The resort is sound." "Indeed," Wolfe said, "because someone corrected it. Silently. A loyal subordinate, perhaps. who understood both the danger and the profit. Every eye swung to Noah Pike. His mouth opened, then closed. I didn't change anything. I wasn't even there when they rebuilt. No. Wolfe's tone didn't rise. Then tell me, Mr. Pike, how your fingerprints came to be on the wax of the letter addressed to me. That landed like a brick through glass. Pike's face drained of color. How could they? You mailed it, Wolfe said, along with the first two, though not from malice. You wished to expose what your conscience couldn't ignore. But someone encouraged you to do it, someone who knew precisely what would surface when you stirred the pest. Pike swallowed hard. She said it was justice. She? Wolfe repeated. His gaze darted. Not to Mrs. Vance, not to Ardmore, but to the lawyer. Linden rose half out of his chair. That's absurd. Sit, Wolfe commanded. The word froze him mid-motion. Mr. Linden, you are an industrious man, but not imaginative. You preserved that second will for leverage. When Mrs. Vance refused to resume your, how shall we say, arrangement, you turned to Mr. Pike. He adored his mentor, mistrusted Ardmore, and was easily persuaded that vengeance was righteousness. You guided him, provided the paper, the wax, the addresses. You intended scandal to ruin Ardmore and frighten Mrs. Vance into dependence. Upon you. Linden's face had gone gray. You have no proof. I have motive, opportunity, and a most unconvincing denial, Wolfe said. The handwriting on the latest letter, the one addressed to the heirs of Alan Vance, matches notes from your own firm's stationery. You are careless, sir. Pride always is. Mrs. Vance's voice cut the silence like glass. You used Alan's death for revenge. You, of all people. Linden turned to her, something breaking loose behind his eyes. He destroyed you, Miriam. You never saw it. You think I wanted to hurt you. I wanted you free of his ghost, but you couldn't let him go. Wolfe lifted a hand. Spare us confession. Mr. Goodwin will call Inspector Kramer. You will surrender the originals in your office, including the draft will. That will spare you the embarrassment of arrest. Linden sagged. You think this will bring him peace? No, Wolfe said, but it will restore proportion. The living have abused the dead long enough. After they'd gone, Kramer's men having collected Linden and his paperwork, the brownstone settled back into its habitual rhythm. Wolfe, content as a man after surgery successfully completed, poured another beer and sat heavy in his chair. You know, I said, for a case about a dead man, there was remarkably little blood. Pfui, he said. Blood is messy, transient. The true currency of crime is memory. Mr. Vance built monuments of stone. Mr. Linden built monuments of guilt. Both were bound to collapse. He raised his glass slightly. To gravity, Archie, the only force men never learn to resist. I grinned, and here I thought you'd toast to justice. I'm not sentimental, Wolfe said. Justice, like architecture, is best appreciated from a safe distance. He drained the glass, sighed, and closed his eyes. The orchids would get him in the morning, for now the house had its peace again, and I, watching him there in the lamplight, thought that maybe he was right. Some men fall by accident, some by design, but the ones who fall hardest are the ones who believe they can build high enough to escape either. I thought that was the end of it. Wolfe had delivered his verdict. Kramer had hauled Linden out like a man caught embezzling the 10 Commandments, and Fritz was already resurrecting calm with veal stew and burgundy. The house felt normal again, or as normal as a house can when it's got a mind in residence that runs on ego and yeast. But if there's one thing experience has taught me, it's that endings in our line of work are just the polite part before the coda. I'd barely written the last line of the day's report when the phone rang. It was Saul Panzer, and his voice had that rare tension I'd only heard twice before, both times when bodies had a way of surprising us. Archie, he said, don't hang up. Linden's dead. I sat forward. You sure? Positive. Found in his office, half an hour after Kramer's boys dropped him there. They swear he was alive when they left. Suicide? Maybe. But if it is, it's the neatest one I've ever seen. No gun, no rope, just a broken whiskey glass, spilled ink, and a typewriter still running with the carriage jammed against the edge. I felt the weight of that. And a note. Typed. One line. He built the flaw into all of us. When I hung up, Wolfe's eyes were already on me. He hadn't heard Saul, but he'd read enough faces to translate silence. Trouble, he said. Lyndon's dead. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly through his nose. When a man constructs his own trap, he seldom forgets to test it. That sounds poetic. I'd call it suspicious. Of course it is. The letters ceased their purpose the moment he was exposed. His death renews their value. Someone wishes the play to continue. I phoned Kramer before he could. The inspector's tone was sour enough to curdle milk. Don't tell me Wolfe's going to start preaching ghosts again. Lyndon's dead. Case closed. Kramer, I said, if you think this is suicide, you've been reading too many mystery novels. Goodwin. Just listen. He was found with a typewriter and a cryptic note. We've had 3 fake letters already. You think he suddenly developed a taste for drama? That got him quiet for 3 seconds. If your fat friend's got another theory, I'll give him one chance to spit it out. Tomorrow morning. My office. When I told Wolfe, he frowned but didn't argue. That meant he'd already decided to go. Figuratively, of course. Physically, the brownstone had a better chance of sprouting wings than Wolfe did of crossing a threshold voluntarily. He worked the rest of the night in silence. I could tell by the rhythm of his breathing that he was arranging the pieces again, the letters, the inheritance, the buried plans, the motives that hadn't died with Lyndon. I stayed out of it. By morning, he was ready. Kramer arrived at 9 sharp, mud still on his shoes and skepticism all over his face. You dragged me across town for what, Wolfe? A ghostwriter? Wolfe gestured to the chair opposite his desk. A seat, Inspector, if only to prevent you from tripping over your conclusions. Mr. Goodwin, the notes. I handed over copies of the letters, the last one included. Wolfe spoke without inflection. Lyndon's death was convenient, too much so. His guilt suited everyone. But he did not write the final message. Kramer snorted. You've got evidence, I suppose. The tone, Wolfe said. Lyndon wrote like a lawyer. The phrase, he built the flaw into all of us, is metaphor, not litigation. It implies awareness of design, of architecture. A phrase belonging to someone who saw Alan Vance not as a victim, but as a builder of something corrupt. That could be anybody, Kramer said. Half of Manhattan's been through that firm. Not anybody, Wolfe murmured. Only someone who believed Vance's death was deserved and knew about the hidden flaw. That limits us to one person, Gideon Ardmore. Kramer leaned forward. You saying the kid killed Lyndon? I'm saying, Wolfe said, that Mr. Ardmore feared discovery. Lyndon's exposure threatened more than reputation. It threatened the integrity of every property his firm built with Vance's designs. The flaw Vance embedded could be traced, replicated, perhaps even found elsewhere. Imagine, Inspector, what a single credible claim of structural sabotage would do to an empire built on glass and steel. Kramer rubbed his jaw. You're guessing. I do not guess. I deduce. Then deduce a warrant. I will do better, Wolfe said. I will bring him here. He rang for Fritz. Arrange for Mr. Ardmore to visit at noon. Say that I have recovered additional documents bearing his father's signature. He will not resist curiosity. Kramer muttered something unprintable, but stayed. He knew Wolfe too well to walk away when the bait was set. Ardmore arrived at 12:05, immaculate as ever, but with a faint sheen of sweat under his collar. He greeted us both with just enough arrogance to cover fear. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "you implied something urgent." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "It concerns the death of Mr. Linden." Ardmore froze. "What about it?" "You killed him," Wolfe said simply. Kramer straightened. "Hold on, Wolfe." Wolfe raised a hand. "I will explain. You went to his office last night under the pretext of reconciliation. You knew he would drink. You provided the whiskey. The typewriter and the note were staged afterward, a continuation of the letter motif. But your mistake was aesthetic. You used Alan Vance's phrasing, the flaw. Linden would never have chosen it." Ardmore tried to speak, but Wolfe kept going. "Mr. Pike can confirm your visit. He saw you enter Linden's building. He called Mr. Goodwin just after, though he did not yet realize what he'd witnessed. When you left, Linden was dead. You ensured his silence, thinking the storm would die with him." Ardmore's face went white, then gray. "You have nothing." "I have logic," Wolfe said. "It is enough." Kramer's hand closed around Ardmore's arm before the man could bolt. "We'll see if it's enough in court." When they were gone, the office returned to its blessed quiet. Wolfe exhaled and reached for his beer. I said, "You sure about him?" "As sure as one can be of men who build with lies," Wolfe said. "He killed to protect the illusion that his father's empire was flawless, but Alan Vance made certain no edifice could stand without consequence. Even the dead can be excellent engineers." I sat, letting the silence settle again. Outside, the city hummed, busy forgetting what we'd just uncovered. Inside, Wolfe sipped his beer and finally said, "Archie, when I die, do not permit anyone to write my ghost." "Sure," I said. "But if someone tries, I'll make sure they at least spell your name right." He grunted, eyes already half closed. "Imbecile." And that, as far as Wolfe was concerned, was the last word on the matter, and on ghosts who wrote from the grave. The next morning broke soft and colorless, the kind of New York morning that looks like it's waiting for a decision. The case, if you could call it that, was over. Kramer had phoned before breakfast to confirm what Wolfe already knew. Ardmore had confessed, though not cleanly. He'd tried to make it sound accidental. A shove during an argument, a broken glass, a panic that followed, but in the end, the words had betrayed him the way all architects are betrayed by gravity. Wolfe didn't bother to answer the call himself. He sat in his chair, grey robe folded over him like a cloak, eyes on the orchids through the glass. I could tell by the slant of his mouth he was content. Not joyful, not even satisfied, just balanced again, like a clock that's been wound after running a little fast. Fritz brought in breakfast, eggs poached to the millisecond, bread still steaming from the oven, and the first beer of the day, foamed to the rim. Wolfe's fork paused halfway to his mouth when I came in with the Gazette. "Anything of interest?" he asked. I dropped it on the desk. Front page, Kramer's enjoying his press moment. Headline says, "Ardmore heir confesses to lawyer's death. Inheritance plot unfolds." They're already hinting that he'll plead temporary insanity. The firm's stock dropped 8 points before lunch. "Expected," Wolfe said. "Civilization is addicted to spectacle." "Yeah," I said, "and to headlines. No mention of you, though." "Excellent," he said. "Publicity is for politicians and undertakers. I am neither." He speared a piece of bread and studied it as though the crumbs were data points. "I trust Mrs. Vance?" "She left for Connecticut last night. Said she'd send a letter of thanks once she remembered how to write one without trembling." "Good," Wolfe murmured. "Fear can be as corrosive as guilt, but less final." I poured myself coffee and leaned against the doorframe. So that's that. Linden dead by greed, Ardmore by pride, Vance by his own genius, and everyone else by proximity. He grunted. A fair summary. The dead man left a flaw in his design, but the true flaw lay in the living. They built on deceit and were astonished when it collapsed. "Poetic," I said. Want me to write it up like that for the records? He shot me a glance. No. I rely on your prose only when accuracy would be tedious. We ate in silence for a while. Outside, a cab honked, the city reasserting its rhythm. In the plant rooms above, I could hear the faint hiss of misting valves, the orchids getting their share of serenity. Wolfe finally pushed his plate away and leaned back, eyes half closed. Archie, I once told you that appetite defines morality. A man's vices reveal the measure of his mind. Lyndon hungered for control, Ardmore for legacy, and Alan Vance for immortality. Each fed his appetite until it consumed him. And you? I asked. What's your appetite? Truth, he said simply, though I'm wise enough to season it with beer. I couldn't argue with that. The doorbell rang just then, soft, hesitant. Fritz went to answer it, and a moment later returned with a small parcel, postmarked from Connecticut. He handed it to Wolfe, who examined it with mild suspicion, then gestured for me to open it. Inside was a single envelope tied with a strip of faded blue ribbon. No red wax this time. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, Miriam Vance's. The note inside was short. Mr. Wolfe and Mr. Goodwin. I have burned the last of Alan's papers. The sea keeps what it took. For what remains, I thank you. You have freed a memory I had mistaken for love. I shall not write again. There was no signature. Wolfe read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it on the corner of his desk, as if setting down a finished chapter. Good, he said. She's learning restraint. That's one word for it, I said. Another is peace. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Possibly. I turned toward the window. The city looked cleaner somehow, rinsed by distance. Cases end the way storms do, quietly after the noise is gone. Behind me, Wolfe sighed and reached for another beer. Archie, he said, when you call Kramer, remind him to send back the plans. I detest unfinished paperwork. You mean the ones Vance buried? Of course. They belong to history now. And history, unlike men, does not lie. He took a long sip, then added, See that Fritz serves lamb for dinner. I find mutton restorative after moral fatigue. Yes, sir, I said. As I left the office, I looked back once. Wolfe sat in his great chair, the morning light soft on his face, the orchids beyond him glowing in the glass room like captive fire. For all his size and silence, he looked, just for a moment, like a monument himself. Not to genius or pride, but to endurance. And that's how it ended. The case of Alan Vance, the architect who built his own requiem, closed without fanfare. The brownstone was quiet again, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. But later that night, when Fritz had gone upstairs and Wolfe was asleep behind his walls of books and orchids, I took out Miriam's letter and read it once more. The ink shimmered faintly under the lamp. Then I set it back in the drawer beside my reports and said aloud, though no one heard me, You were wrong, Wolfe. Sometimes history lies. It just lies quietly enough for us to keep living. And with that, I turned off the light